Hi, welcome to the Louisa Project 2027, where we discuss education, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And today's show is going to be the first of two shows based on an interview we had with Brandon Sutton from Project Sanity, another one of the great shows from the Benjamin Dixon Network. Um, he sat in on a press conference with the Green Party candidates, Dr. Jill Stein and Vice Presidential candidate Ajamu Baraka. Um, and he also had a sit down with Vice Presidential candidate Ajamu Baraka, and we're going to discuss those. We're going to go over those two things today. Also, we're going to have links to both those events in the show notes. Without further ado, here's the first half of that interview or discussion, as Brandon likes to call it. Thank you. All right. My name is Mike Redwine of the Louisa Project 2027, where we discuss education, entrepreneurship, and innovation. And today we're going to have an interview. It's going to be a wide-ranging interview with Mr. Brandon Sutton. He's a contributing member of the Project Sanity, another great show on the Benjamin Dixon Network. We're gonna go through three basic things. We're gonna riff a little bit because apparently that's how me and Brandon do things. All right, but we're gonna talk about he had a interview. He was sat in with the Green Party today in a press conference, and he asked a question about education at my behest, and I appreciate him asking it. And he also had an interview with a vice presidential candidate on the Green Party ticket of Mr. Ajamu Baraka. And then finally we're going to discuss what we actually came here for: poverty and education. All right. So without further ado, I'll let Brandon introduce himself. Brandon, take it off, take over, whatever we're going to call it today.
Well, hello, my name is Brandon. I'm a contributor at Project Sanity. This is not an interview, Mr. Redwine. This is a conversation. We're just friends having a conversation about education and poverty and education reform. That's all good. Specifically, I'm a PhD candidate, and my particular fields of study are education, public institutions, in the intersection with communities and people, and how communities seek to change education to fit their own community standards.
All right, cool. All right, good stuff. Good stuff. All right, folks, we're gonna get this thing rolling. I think we got a few folks watching us live from internally from the Progressive Army, because I pre-produce, because I make a lot of mistakes. I cut that stuff out so I look like a pro.
I don't make any mistakes.
So yeah, see, Brandon doesn't make mistakes. So
I'm perfect.
It's purely for my benefit. Purely for my benefit. All right, so Brandon, you were kind enough to ask. You asked us before you went to the Green Party. To the Green Party presidential and vice presidential candidates, their press conference. You were kind enough to ask the internally at the Progressive Army. We had some questions, and I asked them about education policy in general. So if you could just run down how that worked out for us.
Okay, so I mean, that would have been probably the question I asked as well, because it's something that I've been really interested in this presidential election cycle, where you hear a lot of people talking about free college tuition, free, whether we should have free 4-year public colleges or free 2-year community colleges, free college. But in my mind, and I'm sure in yours as well, I don't mean to presume, like that's a little bit too little too late. Our K to 12 education system is a vast gap in achievement, a vast gap in funding, a vast gap in expectations and quality. And so my question was framed as such. It was framed as, we're in New York City right now. In New York City, which is one district, it's all under one Department of Education, has some of the best and worst school districts in America. The worst school district in America, if I'm not mistaken, is Bushwick, which has a graduation rate at the high school level of 50% or less. And so, yeah, so both Dr. Stein and Mr. Baraka answered the question, and Jill Stein gave the answer that I like to hear. The Green New Deal does not specifically speak to education and education reform, but they do have an education reform within their larger platform, and it is such. I would characterize as being 3 points. The first point is to end the funding inequality that exists at the public school level. So ending the tying school district and school funding to property tax, which we know can leads to this very bad cycle of poor neighborhoods having poor schools. The second point would be to end this sort of predatory and intensive testing regime that we have now, that is mostly just used to close schools and blame teachers, and also that also includes revitalization of teachers unions, in order to garner smaller class sizes and improve that sort of thing. And the third is a more structural based solution where we institute social programs, we revitalize social programs that were destroyed in the 90s, so that kids are going to school with full bellies, not worried about housing and about their housing situation, not worried about how they're going to eat tonight, not worried about these things, so they can learn more effectively. So we have to remember, school is not a vacuum. These kids' lives do not exist within a vacuum where they they can sort of separate their home life from their school life. So if kids are coming to school and they're hungry and they're tired and they're worried, they just cannot learn for a variety of reasons. So, and that's the kind of answer I like to hear. I don't like to hear we're going to pump more money into schools and see or school districts and see what happens. I like to hear, we're going to focus on the totality of people's lives and how school fits into that totality. Because let's be honest, the vast majority of learning is done outside of schools. It's done informally. So, we have to tackle school education reform informally as well.
All right. That is a great response. That's really a broad response, because a lot of people, as you said, forget that the student is a person. It's not just a number. It's not just a head count, right? It's a complete human being that has needs outside of the classroom and needs that feed into their performance within the classroom, or how well they absorb what's going on in the classroom. And I think all of us have had those times. Well, most of us had those times where we're just hungry and can't concentrate. Imagine that the entire day, perhaps the entire week, all right? And try to, and people, this lack of empathy is one of the many things that kills me about the direction we've been going in for maybe, I guess, since the 80s. This lack of where empathy is seen as a weakness as opposed to a strength that helps us become better human beings and helps us build a better society. It's this lack of empathy is helping destroy opportunity for the entire country, not just kids in need, but people in need, but it's the entire country suffers, as we were saying off air. When Brown versus the Board of Education went through, if we as a country would have taken that and run with it and say, okay, this is the mandate, we're going to do better, there wouldn't be a dearth of any education, any field of endeavor, because everybody would have a chance and have a shot at, have an opportunity to follow what they love, and the country would have, I know, and to a certain extent, it broadens the pie, right? Everybody's worried about getting their piece of the pie, but you broaden entrepreneurship, you broaden opportunity. There's so many things, ingenuity and innovation. So many things can be broadened just by having a better education system. All right, I'm sorry, I went on for a minute there.
Oh no, it's fine. I mean, I did, and I mean, you brought up so many good points there. And talking about students as people, kids are not dumb. Kids know when their schools are bad. I think this idea that kids are just passive receptacles for knowledge and information, it needs to go away. Kids, kids that as young as 7 or 8 know that their school is bad because it doesn't look like this. It doesn't look like the schools on TV. They know that their schools are bad, and they internalize that valuation of society. I mean, they should, because the way your school looks, the way that that structure of the school exists in the material world is a reflection of the way society values the community as a whole. It says that, hey, this is what we think of you. This is what we think of your future. This is what we think of your capabilities. This is what we think you deserve in society. Because let's face it, you're going to be a criminal anyway. That's why we have police police in brown schools. We have teachers who are more likely to punish brown students. We have all these things that exist as reflections of the racial attitudes that we never got rid of when Brown versus Board of Education passed. And I mean, that comes from a failure to integrate schools. Like, let's be honest, our school system is not integrated. It's only gotten more segregated since the 60s. It's only gotten worse. And so we talk about how education is failing in America, and I think we focus on the wrong question, especially from the progressive angle. We were talking about progressive education, the philosophy of progressive education, which was, whose forefather I would say is John Dewey. His education as being intrinsic to a functioning democracy for a variety of reasons, but most importantly, what you mentioned, is to teach empathy. You have to you put these kids in social situations with other kids of various backgrounds and various beliefs and various colors to teach them empathy toward one another. And our society suffers from an incredible lack of empathy. Our definition of how you teach empathy is as a sort of intellectual pursuit. You give your class a copy of Michelle Alexander's book, which is a great book, but it's just a book. Once a year you teach your white students in an all-white class that a black person invented peanut butter, but that's not, and that's not how empathy works. Empathy is taught by putting 12 to 14 white students with 12 to 14 black students and letting them grow up together and saying, hey little bastards, sorry, can't come here, little bastards,
yeah, go ahead, do what you do.
Play together. And that's where we failed. We failed for a variety of reasons, and it just it becomes hard to get people to realize that the world exists outside of their own sphere, and that people are people outside of their own sphere, and that their problems aren't the only problems in the world.
Okay, yeah, I agree 100%. Because I went to private schools, and it was I guess a pretty good mix. I guess it was pretty reflective of society. The majority of the kids were white, obviously, because it was a private school. But we had Asian kids, we had Caribbean kids, we had regular old African American kids like me. We had kids actually born on the continent. I mean, and it was a great way, and my neighborhood was like that as well. But it was a little more. My neighborhood was a little less white, but it was really, really mixed neighborhood. And growing up in that environment prepared me. I didn't know it was preparing me, but it prepared me to deal with so many different types of people. I lived in so many countries, and I have no problem dealing with anybody. I have sat down and talked to rebels in Burundi, and I've talked to diplomats in Egypt. It's being able to talk to people and being able to empathize with people goes such a long way. And people don't see that as it's emotional intelligence. That's a big part of it, right? And people don't see that as a skill or something important. You need to know the math, you need to know the engineering, and you need to know science. Everything else doesn't matter. And all we're building is little machines, and it's not fair to the students as whole human beings, right? Because the whole human being should be fed by education, not just, we're setting you up for a career field or setting you up, not even a career field, setting you up for a job. If it's available, go, and that's completely and entirely unfair.
Absolutely. I mean, let me clarify what I mean by empathetic thinking, because I believe in defining what I mean. I believe empathetic thinking to be two things. A, recognizing that people who don't look like you or live like you are, in fact, people who deserve the same rights as you. And B, looking at people who make different decisions or choose to live their lives differently than you as, not being inherently illogical, not being inherently wrong, and their choices as being real choices, not uninformed choices, not X amount choices, not, just choices that are different from yours based on their life experience. And I think with this election cycle, we've seen that there's a large group of people, especially in the elite, who feel like if you do not make their choices, you're just wrong. You are inherently wrong for no other reason than you have chosen set of values, or not chosen, based on your experience, your lived experience. You have a different set of values and a different outlook on life. It's just this inability of our leaders and our elite class to look at people who are, different from them and go, okay, I can understand why you see the world in a different way. I don't see the world that way, but I can understand why you might. Because when I was 12, I knew a Muslim girl in my class, and she often had to ask questions about the food at the cafeteria. So I understand why you look at food that way. I understand why you look at the election that way. But we don't have that. We have a very sort of you either agree with the establishment or you are incapable of making logical choices. And that's not empathy. That's I guess that's domination.
Yeah, it's like the Borg, It's like resistance is futile. It's futile. You are either come aboard the way we do things, or you're not worthy of getting all these great benefits of being an American, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And that your view of empathy is to my mind is accurate, because it forces you to examine your environment. It forces you to examine other people's choices, right? If you just dismiss it as, oh, that was just stupid, or that doesn't make sense, or whatever, when you just dismiss that, you miss an opportunity to grow as a human being, as a person, and you miss the opportunity to see things from that person's point of view. And that is a learning experience in itself, just seeing the world through other people's eyes.
Absolutely. I mean, if you've ever heard or uttered the phrase, people don't vote in their own self-interest, you don't understand empathy, because you have assumed that everyone's definition of self-interest is your own. Everyone should be voting on their economic self-interest, as opposed to their religious self-interest, or as opposed to their moral self-interest, or as opposed to, or maybe they just have one issue that defines their entire life. And right or wrong, you gotta meet people where they're at. So it is what it is.
Yeah, that was one of the big things during this cycle with Bernie Sanders. People were hesitant to get on board Bernie Sanders because they assumed that the working class white people that were on board with Bernie Sanders weren't on our side as people of color, right? Just because they were working class white people. But these people knew who Bernie Sanders was. They knew what he was about. Bernie Sanders doesn't hide anything. If he does hide things, he doesn't hide them very well. Everybody knew what Bernie Sanders was about. Right, so you can't tell me that these people were racist and they were just kind of bored for a free lunch. I don't know what they were coming aboard for, right? But they were, to my mind, the majority of them were coming aboard because they see society is screwed up at this point, right? Our society could be and should be better, and nobody can tell them we can't afford it. Nobody can tell me we can't afford it. We're choosing not to afford it.
Absolutely, and I mean, just to address what you said right there, real quick, because I mean, we're gonna have to pivot back to education at a certain point. But
eventually,
I think the most undertold story of really the past few years is the reasons why the Democratic establishment and not just the establishment in terms of like the Clintons and the Wasserman Schultz and your DNC, but also just like your everyday average elite liberal urban white person have abandoned the rural white vote, the working class white vote, and the poor white vote. I mean, it was a conversation that we had about the West Virginia primary, and this is as a society, we have really failed to engage with the concept of whiteness as an identity, and what it means for liberals to be, especially in my generation, 18 to 25, 18 to 30-year-old white liberals, white middle class liberals, and the kind of liberal guilt they have, and how it manifests itself, emotionally and cognitively. And I think one of the big ways it manifests itself is through the demonization of the working class white folks, the poor white folks, the Southern white folks, the older white folks, the desire to point to them as being, the bad whites. Same way, some black people point as the bad blacks, and they use them as a symbol of everything that's wrong with, whiteness. And they make racism inextricable from being from the South, or racism that's inextricable from being old. And you can't teach. I'm sure you've heard it. Oh, that's just an old white guy. You can't teach him not to be racist. That's just who he is. It's like, what? It's like I've seen racism. I think we've all seen so much casual racism from the Hillary Clinton camp and her supporters that we know that to be a fallacy now. We know that racism.
We should know.
We should know. Racism runs deep within the liberal establishment, but because they're, the left, they've been allowed to define racism as essentially just not us. No matter what we do, or no matter what we do, and as long as we don't say the N-word, we're not racist. Those are the racists over there. You know, the ones who are voting for the Bernie bros. Those are the sexists. But you know, like having gone to a lot of schools, having gone to a lot of, you know, universities in the Midwest, having gone to a lot of universities in rural parts of New York State, I've seen more, and also having my family be from South Carolina and you know, around the South, I've seen more racism on college campuses from, you know, the middle class, either urban or ex-urban or suburban, you know, so, you know, people from Long Island, or racism from them.
Staten Island too. Staten Island folks. Woo. Yeah. I went to high school. I went to high school in Bayonne, New Jersey. Ooh. Some of the folks.
I see way more interracial relationships in impoverished communities, like, than I do on college campuses. I see a lot more. I see a lot because, you know, that in that community they are integrated by, you know, by just necessity, and so they have to live together. I mean,
but,
of course,
but I think. But, yeah, because I mean, in impoverished communities, you have to get to know people. You know, it's not like you can't go into your silo and not have a sense of community. Like I live in a suburb where I know like 5 of the people in this subdivision, right? And it doesn't bother me at all. But I can, because I don't need them, right? I just, this is just a house to me and a neighborhood my kids playing. I don't need them, right? But in societies, in societies with folks that have less, they need each other, right? And that's a good. It's not that they have less is a good thing, but it's good. They interact with one another. They spend time with each other. You know, they're outside. I mean, when I was a young guy growing up in Jersey City, we spent time hanging out on the corner. That doesn't happen in these suburbs like this. You know what I mean? You know, you go from, you know, these kids nowadays in these suburbs, they go from house to house to house to house to house. Right. So they had this, even in with all the kids in this neighborhood, it still clicks. Right. So my street is better than your street, and it's a bunch of madness. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no. So, yeah, I guess we should. But just.
Yeah. You know, let me wrap this piece up right quick. I'm sorry. Yeah. Go ahead. You have something else?
Well, I guess my big critique, as we're going to talk about Bernie Sanders for a second, my big critique of Bernie Sanders was that he was pushing a very sort of class makes everything agenda. Like that was the underlying current of a lot of his earlier speeches. You know, we gotta attack class, we gotta attack class. And even if you believe that sort of Marxian idea that class is the basis of all things and exactly all problems, that's fine. But you have to understand that even if you're right, you know, objectively correct, I can't speak to that. I don't know. That's not the way the majority of people understand the world to exist. So at a certain point, you have to meet people where they're at and lead them back to where you are. Because that's the only way you're going to institute any kind of meaningful changes, by addressing what people consider. People are fully capable of articulating their own problems with the world, and you don't know any better than them. So you have to at least engage. And if you do, you still can't. You got to at least pretend. So you still have to engage with. You know, you still have to engage with what people are saying that their problems are. And if you think you have some sort of greater insight into it, explain it. Take what they're saying and lead them back to where you are. That's what makes you, an effective communicator, an effective, persuasion is, getting people to see the world through your point of view by engaging with their point of view. But yeah, you wanted to move on topic, so you totally should.
Yeah, sorry, just a quick wrap up. As we said, Brandon asked the question, and we had 3 basic points: ending funding inequality. Well, basic points for fixing our overall education system. Ending funding inequality. Get a handle on this torturous testing regimen, and revitalizing social programs in order to support the entire child as a whole human being, or the entire student as a whole human being. Did I get that right, Brandon?
Absolutely.
All right, I win. See the power of taking notes, people. All right, so now we got that part. Now, yeah, exactly. All right, so now, and I'll put links in at the end of this. I'll put some links to the press conference. If you shoot me the link, if you don't mind, Brandon, and for our next subject, which is. Brandon was lucky enough. He went out there and tackled Ajamu Baraka, the vice presidential candidate for the Green Party, Mr. Ajamu Baraka. Brandon was out there, had an opportunity to sit down and talk to him, which is amazing for someone who just a young guy out here just starting out in journalism. Journalism, as far as I know, to sit down with a vice presidential, a relevant vice presidential candidate, that's big stuff. So, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about your meeting with Mr. Baraka.
Well, after the press conference was over, and it lasted about an hour, Dr. Jill Stein left for the moment, and left to go to her next meeting. And I saw that Mr. Ajamu Baraka had a little bit of free time on his hands. I flirted with I flirted with his staffer. Nice young lady, very attractive.
Take advantage of the situation. I ain't mad at you, young man. Go ahead out there.
Gave her a wink and a smile, and I asked him to sit down with me just to talk about the Black community for a second, because there's something that didn't come up during the press conference. But if you watched the town hall, there was they brought in their I don't want to say their token, but they brought in a Black person to ask the Black question of the candidates. And I felt that her question wasn't particularly
controversy on my show. Here we go.
I'm
just messing with you. Go ahead.
The question wasn't particularly deep, and I wanted to engage. It was about police brutality, and because Milwaukee is fresh in everyone's mind. So I felt that it'd be much better I could ask a better question, have a better sit down about the issue. And so the question I basically asked them, which it actually ties into education pretty well, was that when we talk about police brutality, are we not just talking about the canary in the coal mine? Like, are we not just talking about, the most overt form of, institutionalized racism and interpersonal racist, mentality that justify that police brutality? Because let's be honest, a good portion of America just doesn't care about what's going on. And because it's not as though the schools in Black communities are doing any better. It's not as though the hospitals in Black communities are doing any better. It's not as though any of the public institutions in Black communities that are meant to serve the populace equally are doing any better. So, how do we tackle I guess you'd call it this institutional gap that exists between Black communities, which are effectively, colony states within America and cities, and the larger America? And so I call
them urban
urban jungles, urban zoos.
Where we put Native Americans?
Reservations. Reservations.
Yeah, urban reservations. That's what I call them. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's functionally what they are. Because let's be honest.
Absolutely.
We basically send police into we send police into these communities, these very segregated communities, to basically civilize them. You only see the kind of kinetic policing, the quota system, stop and frisk, fishing for tickets, fishing for warrants in the Black community, and that's kinetic policing. That's having a community live in fear of that's having a community live in fear of the law, because they've been criminalized from birth inherently. But we also send teachers into these communities. We send teachers who don't have any ties to the Black community, who don't have any real teaching experience within the Black community. And I'm not saying the teachers have to live there or be Black or but it'd be nice if they knew a Black person. It'd be nice if they
beyond the kids in the classroom, understand the entire experience.
Yeah, because beyond kids in the classroom, because I date a lot. I'm a good-looking young man. I date a lot. I date a lot.
Okay. Hey, I ain't mad at you. Do what you do.
Okay,
young man, rumble.
How's my sound? Am I good?
You good.
Okay, so I date a lot, and I date a lot of teachers because I study education, and I date a lot of teachers who basically live that life, who they live in, and they commute to the Bronx to gentrify Harlem. They live in Harlem and they commute to the Bronx to teach. They basically go into these communities and they teach. They go in to teach young Black kids how to, they go into civilize young Black kids. And in dating these people, I've had to have conversations with them about what it's like to be Black, or what it's like to be a minority in America, and try to help them understand why they don't, they have problems that are, how to tackle these problems that are different. So one of the big problems that the myriad girls I've dated who will go unnamed had is that how does she get her students to come to her for help? And I was like, help-seeking behavior in the minority community, I would say even the poor community in general, is frowned upon. And like going for help, going to a stranger or an institute or authority figure for help within the Black community is frowned upon.
Seen as weakness, yeah. Seen as weakness, yeah.
And the best quote about this, I've read a few books on help seeking, but the best quote I've ever heard about this comes from Hip Hop Atlanta, Love It Hip Hop Atlanta, and where one of the characters says, when you're Black, you don't seek therapy. And when you're Black, you don't go to a therapist. You either help yourself or you find Jesus. And that's
valid. That's valid.
And that is that's Black help seeking, and that's minority help seeking, that's poor help seeking in a nutshell. Like, you either help yourself, you have your friends help you, you ask your cousin, or you go to church. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to sort of be able to overcome that barrier. Sort of break that barrier that exists, that us versus them mentality, or rather us and them mentality that exists. But go back to your original question about what Mr. Baraka said. He said, he made we have to start reclaiming our own communities. We have to start reclaiming this education system for ourselves and making our voices heard, and not taking responsibility for ourselves, but mobilizing ourselves in a meaningful way, and not relying on, not waiting for outside help to fix the problems, going to get that outside help. So really, forcing change through, coming together as communities and using our numbers to motivate policies in our favor. I was going to say, so basically he said that Mr. Baraka said that we should, we have to, at a certain point, not take responsibility, but come together as a community, as a Black community, as communities, and use our numbers to, demand change. Not wait for change, but go out and seek it. Because obviously you can only do so much within the community, but funding is complicated. But if you coalesce together as a community, you can go out and demand change from bodies in a more unified way.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the Democrats, they don't win without us. They don't. They and part of the reason is what we talked about before. They shun the working class white vote. But it seems like we pushed away that vote because of the racism within that vote, and you're going to get more if we don't have them aboard our coalition. But that didn't quite work out the way they said it would. But that's an argument for another day.
Well, I mean, yeah, the Democrats are, for Black people, the Democrats seem like the only game in town. There's an article that came out recently about, the Black vote being key to destabilizing the two-party system. That if, Black people just coalesced together and went for a third party, we could at least get them within, with a minority of white supporters or Latino supporters or any other supporters, get them into the national debates, and force that hand of the Democratic Party, because at this point the Democratic Party is not really courting the Black vote; they're just pandering to the Black vote. They're saying they listen to Drake music, but I don't care. It comes down to what are you going to do for me? And I think that's been really the key question that's gone unanswered by the Democratic Party, this cycle, besides not be Trump, is, well, what are you going to do for us? And, what do you have in store for us that's concrete? And it's been a lot of wishy-washy ideals, been a lot of, well, we're gonna fight for $15 an hour, we promise to fight, but that's, at a certain point we have to be willing to demand change or leave. Demand change, or if the game is rigged, start a new game. But
yeah, I hear you. All right. What else we learned from Mr. Baraka?
I mean, well, besides that, it was a relatively brief conversation, about 10 minutes altogether. He spoke he spoke critically of, like you said, the lack of empathy from America at large towards the Black community. The lack of empathy, which prevents, meaningful change within the Black community because ultimately when people watch, he made the point that when people watch these shootings on TV, when they watch this stuff on TV, like it just doesn't click. It's like, you know, it might as well be happening in Kabul, or might as well be happening in another country, because functionally it is happening in another country, like a Black America. It's happening. So people don't
we're
see,
so segregated. Yes.
people don't see something being done to the Black community, to brown bodies, in their name, in the name of, you know, in the name of keeping the status quo the way it is. What they see is just like, oh, look, isn't it awful what happens to Black people? But it's just such a disconnect.
Yeah. And often the answer is, well, they probably did something wrong. They probably deserved it. You know, no matter what it is.
They would have deserved it in the future.
Yeah. Another one of my sparring partners. He's quick to say, well, if he would have, he probably would have done something wrong in the future. What?
I mean, like that. Anyway, that's a very.
Anyway, let me go ahead.
No, please. It's your show. You can.
No, go ahead. If you got something to say, go ahead.
No, because that's one of the that's one of the key parts of, you know, prejudice. You know, like you're prejudging, but not only prejudging someone. I said it off camera. I'll say it again on camera. You're not only prejudging someone's present and past through like a racist lens, but you're dictating what their future is. You're saying that, okay, well, you know, he may not have done anything now, but one day he probably would have committed a crime, and so that makes it kind of okay. You know, how would he would never have contributed to society. So, you know, like what, you know, like we've, like, as you know, Mr. Baraka said, like we've made the Black community, we've made a superfluous part of the capitalist system. Like people don't view us as, and due to like inequality that exists within the system and the lack of Black wealth, people don't, although I will say that, you know, Black people, as you know, Black culture, so you say your rappers, your athletes, contribute a very large amount to the overall, you know, wealth of the nation. Like the average wealth of Black people is still so low that they're inconsequential to the capitalist system. So they might as well not exist if you are viewing the world through a capitalist lens. Anything that happens to them is just whatever. So I mean, you look at, and when we live in such a punitive society, that when you talk about education, or you talk about police violence, or you talk about all of these things that happen when you're poor or Black, like, you know, let's be very clear. Poverty in America, bad education in America, and all of the associated factors are a punishment. In America, we view poverty as a punishment for something. Like it's not like, that's the only way you can understand that. Like the way how people get so up in arms when someone who is poor has a microwave, because if you're poor, you should be suffering. You know, like that is part of the American condition. If you're poor, you deserve to be poor. And if you deserve to be poor, you deserve to be punished for being poor because you're deviant. So we say, and to bring this back to education, we say, oh, you're poor because you didn't major in, you know, because you majored in English. Who cares if you like English? Who cares if you're a really good poet? You're poor. Like, you're poor because that's your fault, and you deserve what happens to you. And so I would say, you know, poverty should not be viewed as a punishment. Poverty should be viewed as a structural issue. It should be something that any free society should seek to stamp out. If you think that being poor in America is a legitimate punishment for deviating from, you know, the accepted standards and norms of society, which I will say, being Black deviates from the accepted standards and norms of American society. Being too, as we see with Larry Whitmore, being too Black on TV gets you fired. No, but you got like Trevor Noah up there just chilling. Like I said, they're the same. But no, like being Black in America deviates from the norm. So, you know, the punishment for that is poverty. The punishment for that is bad education. The punishment for that is you know, being beat and shot in the streets. Then you can say the same thing about Occupy Wall Street. The punishment for criticizing that kind of capitalist system and saying it's unfair is to be beat in the streets. Like you should be poor. You know, because you majored in Renaissance Italian instead of majoring in math. What's wrong with you? Even though we know now that majoring in the STEM field doesn't really help you all that much in the long run. You end up better off probably, but not necessarily as well off as you might think you would end up. So like, and I would say anyone who thinks poverty, especially in America, is a legitimate punishment, shouldn't even be allowed to have a dog, because you have a very bad concept of what constitutes a legitimate punishment. You know, like, I would hate to see what you would do to your dog or your kid who made a mistake. If you think that,
Yeah. So two things along those lines. See, now you got me started. Now, two things along. like you said, to my mind, it was something I've always thought, and I meant to write something. I've been meaning to write something about this forever. I guess I have the opportunity now. I can just get online and write it now. But I think on some level, you have to have given up on Black people being able to, or people who tend to be impoverished. You have given up on them as being an integral part of your society, or the ability to become an integral part of your society. To a degree, you would have to have given up on them in order to see this level of poverty, this level of inequality, and just be cool with it, right? To be okay with the status quo. On some level, you've given up on their ability, or you never believed in our ability to be part of the solution, sort of part of the solutions that can help our society. That's one. And the other part is they see, I don't know if they see poverty as a punishment, but they see poverty, they do see poverty as a function of the choices you made, right? I don't know if it's actually, like I said, I don't know if it's actually they see it as punishment, but I know they definitely see it as, okay, you're poor because you made this decision, right? You made some decision down the line that helped you, that makes you poor in this current situation. And that's one of the things that bothers me. And education is a big part of it, right? So, all right, I guess we're gonna move on from there. All right, you got anything to say about your awesome interview with Professor Baraka?
No, I mean you can watch it on the Project Sanity channel, which you can reach from the Benjamin Dixon Show channel, or you can go directly to projectsanity.org and watch it there. There will be clips from the press conference, so please watch it, like it, subscribe here, subscribe there. YouTube subscriptions, you don't get a limited number of them. You can subscribe to everywhere you want to subscribe to. So
all right,
it's just that.
Cool. All right. That was the interview. I hope you enjoyed it. Brandon's a great guy. He's brilliant. You have all his contact info. So if you need to get in touch with him, please do. Next week, we'll have the second half of the interview. And that's it. Thanks for watching the Louisa Project 2027. And please subscribe on YouTube, Spreaker, and everywhere else you find us. Thank you.